Hello, I'm Antonia Blythe, Senior Awards Editor at Deadline, and I'm here with the film The Outrun. Nora, could you please give us a little logline intro for this film for those people that know nothing as of yet?
So the film portrays Rona, a young woman who finds her life torn to pieces, and it is about her recovery in a place on the Orkney Islands in northern Scotland, where she reconnects with her home.
And Saoirse, can you talk a little bit about how you came to this project in the beginning? Obviously, it's based on a memoir. Had you read the book? How did you first connect with Nora?
We were introduced to the project through the book first and foremost. It was a book that Jack Loudon, who also produced the film, was introduced to when he went up to the Orkney Islands a couple years before I had even read it, and he completely fell in love with it. And then when we were in lockdown a few years ago, obviously everyone was reading so much more than they ever did before, and he said, "This is the book that you have to read next because this is the role you have to play next." And as soon as I read it, I think, apart from the subject matter, I think for everyone being something that's incredibly personal for different reasons, as it very much was for me, the prose that Amy sort of produces and the style of writing and the sort of poetry and how she talks about addiction was like nothing I had ever read before. So I was really in love with just how she wrote, first and foremost. And yeah, as I said, it was a topic that I had kind of been daring to explore for quite a while because it was something that was quite personal to me. And so then we got on board with Sarah, and soon after that, Nora came on board.
One of the things I really appreciated about the way that the film is put together is that you balance the harrowing pain, the introspection that Rona is experiencing with this voiceover about facts in nature and about the beauty of the Orkney Islands. Tell me about those decisions. It's just like an appreciation for the location.
Yeah, it all has to do with Amy's book because the book is very internal. It started off as a collection of essays that she put online, and then the feedback was so great that she decided to make a book out of it. But it is really a collection of personal memories and observations and thought processes about the world over 2 winters that she spent by herself on a tiny cottage, in a tiny cottage on a tiny island, Papa Westry. And this is where we also shot the film. So we wanted to keep this internal feeling of the book. And that is how we experimented with something that we now call the nerd layer, which has everything: archive footage, documentary footage, animation, all of it.
The nerd layer, I'm borrowing that. So, Saoirse, this performance, I don't even know how to describe this performance because it's so extraordinary. The scenes with Papa Esidu in London, you're following this trajectory of the spiral into alcoholism and then just the circular attempts to try and pull herself out. What kind of research did you do into that sort of mentality, that headspace? And also, Rona's father is bipolar. So there's a lot of stuff for you to absorb in playing this role.
Yeah, there was a lot to draw on, certainly just from the source material first and foremost. But I think Amy then being so giving with more information about her family and her father and that we were still playing around at that stage with what was going to be the central relationship for the movie. Like, that was still very much a process, but for me personally, I think the dynamic between Rona and her father was very much sort of an anchor for me, and also it was giving us the opportunity to show her kind of at her darkest moments and also at her lightest. I think and Amy would probably say this about her and her dad as well, that they really sort of bring out the best and the worst in each other, and they certainly do in the film version of the book. So that was really helpful. And I was drawn from personal experiences as well. And there's a lot of incredible material out there. Like there's a podcast called Hooked. Have you heard of it? It's this Scouse radio journalist, and she's an author as well. I think her name's Melissa Rice. I think I need to get that right, but it's her and a friend of hers that she met in rehab, who was in there for drug addiction, and they're both clean now, and they have been for years, and they're like young girls. They're just they literally they talk like me. They're around my age, and they've been through like a really horrific time. And each episode is about your first Christmas when you're in recovery, or the first time you're intimate with someone when you're in recovery, things like that. And that was incredibly helpful. And then I also spoke to friends and people who had gone through a similar experience. I really studied Stephen Graham's performance in The Virtues, which was sort of like, I don't know, that was my ultimate inspiration for the drunk acting in particular. So I drew from a lot of different places, yeah.
You mentioned that it's drawn from some personal experience too. Does that, and especially being a producer where, you have this input to a large extent, does that give you pause when you approach your project, or is it actually an additional layer of help for you?
It was an additional layer of help because I haven't suffered from addiction myself, but people very close to me have. And of course, mental illness and addiction go hand in hand. So each person's own experience takes on their own sort of shape and colour. But it's a world that has been very formative in my life. And I think up until probably about 2-3 years ago, there's no way that I emotionally or psychologically would have been able to handle going to those dark places, because it's painful, But I was finally feeling at a place where I could, and and it was incredibly cathartic, and there was a certain amount of I don't know, it just felt like each decision that I made felt very informed, I guess. Yeah.
And Nora, just to wrap up, obviously the film premiered last night. The person in front of me was alternately laughing out loud and crying. This guy in front of me, yeah. And he wasn't the only one, but I could hear him a lot. So I just wondered how you felt being there at the premiere and what you hoped the audience would take from the film.
Well, I mean, premieres are great and exciting, but also quite unnerving, During the film, I sit on pins and needles, but I did think it was very well received, and I hope that the audience is just going through hell and heaven with Rona in all extremes. And it's a tough watch, It goes into very dark places. But I do think it is a film that hopefully gives hope at the end, that recovery is possible, and also raises empathy for people who struggle with addiction.
I have to tell you, I didn't find it a tough watch. I worried I would, having read the synopsis, and then I just didn't. I felt like it was a real story of hope.
That's great.
And I think, just to say as well, this is something that I really picked up on last night, is that there's such a unique rhythm to this story. And someone who we had worked with on it, who's very sort of insightful, he put it really brilliantly, where he was like, you have to give up any notion you have going into the movie and just sort of give yourself over to the rhythm of it and the energy of it. You're watching someone who's sort of in free fall, and you just have to sort of like, give yourself over. And I think once you do, it's, as you say, it's a very sort of cathartic experience. So,
well, congratulations to both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.